I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, Matt Topper, President and Solutions Catalyst at Uber Ether. Matt, the floor is all yours.
Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, as we mentioned, this is the third part in our series. Let's say, there we go. Um, on and today's topic is mastering data quality. So in our first talk, we talked about some other sources of data we might go across the organization and find. In the last section, we talked about application onboarding and how to bring those quickly. But what I find with a lot of organizations is that we see data quality is the first issue, that really we don't get a do a good job addressing up front. So it looks like presenters being a little bit slow pulling up today. So there we go. Um, so yeah, before we begin, as we said, please submit your Q and A's throughout. I'll be watching the chat, and making sure we address those as we go through. So today, really, we're going to focus on these five high-level topics, right? Why data should be your number one priority when you go into these projects. And a lot of times, um, organizations will just jump into buying the tools to actually implement the data governance or identity and access management governance tools before they actually take a look at their data and if they can run the programs effectively. And from there, we'll talk a little bit about what makes good data, right? How to tell good data from bad data, look at the values, look at the changes, look at how complete the data actually is, before you start automating processes around it. In the first webinar series, we talked about building up our data dictionary and really mapping our attribute workflows through the systems, where the data is coming from, how it's being aggregated, how it's being used. So we'll talk about how we also extend that data dictionary, for key relevant attributes, and then how we mitigate data quality issues, some of the approaches that we take here at Uber Ether, building tools into the system to make the data quality issues not go away, but definitely greatly reduced, because we all know data quality is a forever fight. And then really talking about, I call it bringing in the trash, purposefully building your automated test suites, building your use cases to introduce bad data into the testing and validation systems so that you know how the system's going to behave when this data ultimately does show up. I've got a couple quotes in here today from last year's identity governance Magic Quadrant paper from Gartner. And it was funny, last year for the first time, the two first things they put in the front of the paper, were the two facts I'll share today. But this first one was through 2022, so right over the next 2 years, IGA implementations that start with cleanup analytics will show twice the ROI as the ones that don't. And I think that's a really important discussion point when you're working with your leadership and executives, that, you know what, before we go spend a couple $1 million on some of these tools, and then even more so on its services to do those types of implementations, let's look at our data and clean it up. Because by getting those things fixed up front and understanding where the gaps are, you'll really get much further. So we'll dig into that a little bit. And then just a Q&A and wrap up at the end. All right, so this is the third one. I think you all know who I am by now. I won't go into deep. And then, so setting the foundation. Maintaining data quality is the single most important principle of a functioning identity management solution. You'll never realize your benefits of automated user provisioning, lifecycle management, and identity governance if you can't reliably trust your data. And I think the best example of this, and it has happened multiple times over and over across my career, but literally just happened with a large government organization 3 weeks ago that we recently joined to help build out their IGA practices. They'd been loading data into their directories for almost 10 years now, never had a problem with it. But 3 weeks ago, the active user flag disappeared and it came in as nulls overnight. And they had automated processes that just picked up the data, loaded it every day, looked for the changes, and overnight they automatically offboarded a couple 100,000 users because the data showed up as null, right? Thinking about those checks, right? Those things that say, oh, that'll never happen. Understanding all of those key attributes and how they affect your system is really the key to today's discussion. So again, the other Gartner quote for today: organizations that pursue analytics and governance-led deployment approaches for IGA will fulfill their project objectives with planned time scales 4 times as often as those that prioritize provisioning, right? That's a super powerful statement, right? The organizations that look at the data that's coming in, analyzing the data that's going out, the governance-based approaches of, hey, are these people still here? Hey, these people haven't logged in 90 days. Who's their manager? Well, we don't have a manager for 90% of our contractors. We don't have the data that tells us what contracts are assigned to and who the contracting officer or the contracting officer representative for those contracts are. I don't know if we can turn this person off. Are they coming back? Are they not coming back? Are they an auditor that we allow on the system once a year? Right? Taking a look at those analytics and governance ahead of time will pay off, as they say, 4 times as people who just jump in and start trying to automatically create accounts and provision access to new applications. So let's dig in a little bit deeper, right? Every single thing inside of identity and access management keys on the data, right? If we're doing identity proofing, if we're doing sponsorship, right? I have new contractors coming on board. I need to register them. I need to create them a manager. I need to certify that that manager is still there. I need to figure out that if that manager retires, who their new manager is going to be and what the process for making that happen looks like, whether that's in the identity governance system or it's outside of the identity governance system in a contract management system. But thinking about how that data flows in, how that changes, where that needs to go is really the piece that most organizations skip and just really push straight to that provisioning piece, right? And then as we go through, access review and certification. If you're reviewing application access and having the application owner do that, what happens if that application owner no longer does that job, right? Or they leave the organization? What happens if a employee changes to a contractor or a contractor changes to an employee? Are they the same person? Are they a different person? In the DoD, we just went through a huge exercise of changing the certificates that's being generated for the CAC cards to having multiple certs for people's different personas, right? Regularly, we have people who are civilians working for the government during the day, reservists that are part of the military on the weekends, and even sometimes contractors with other agencies that are helping work through problems on a different point in time. So, right, all of these different factors, you've got to think about that data, how it flows, how it's related, if it's the same person, if it's not the same person, if they're federating in, right? Is that somebody we already know? If we don't know, how does that get into the system? How do we continuously validate? How do we reach out and say, hey, this person's access at that other organization that federated into us changed last night, and they no longer have the clearances to see the data that they've subscribed to, right? It's really key to looking at your data quality up front. So 6 areas when I look at data quality and every attribute on data quality that I go through. So completeness, right? What data is missing or unusable? So they might say the key is always Y or N, right? But what happens if it's null or it's NO or it just doesn't exist, right? If they say every user has to have an active flag, check the data, make sure it's actually there, right? Everyone should have an active or inactive, and that's it. What if it's different? A lot of times we make those assumptions that those source systems are going to provide us clean data coming in. And the truth is we've all gone through enough upgrades and migrations over time that decisions get made in flight. And there's a lot of exceptions that never get documented or talked about that we need to think about as part of that completeness of the data, right? Data conformity, right? A United States phone number should be 10 digits long. It shouldn't be 1-800-MY-PILLOW, right? It should be 1-800-234-1234, right? Taking a look at those values, making sure they meet all of the correct structure that we're expecting to be part of the data. And what do you do when it doesn't conform, right? Do you drop it? Do you not load it? Is the entire user record invalidated? You've got to think through those problems as you're bringing these new data sources in. So consistency, right? Is there a possibility for conflicting information? And one of the places I like to point out here is, right, if the person has a government persona, can they also be listed on a contract as a member? In most cases, not really, right? Can you be the security officer that also approves your own access? Probably not a good idea, right? So all different things for the consistency of the data that we need to pull in. Are the codes different across different systems? Here it's a yes, over there it's a Y, over there it's a 1, right? How do you bring those all into a single value that is consistent across all the systems you're pulling together? And this really comes into play a lot when you've got organizations that might have multiple HR systems, or an HR and a payroll system that you're bringing in. For some government agencies, we actually see people drop off the payroll system and no longer be paid before they're actually marked as inactive in the HR system, right? And if they're not getting paid, you probably should turn off their accounts. And most of the time that's 2 weeks, running 2 weeks behind in the government. So we're already too late. And that gets us into the next point of accuracy. And some people would also call this timeliness, right? Is the data, not only is the data correct, but is it timely? That might be great that you took your privileged user training, but it was 5 years ago, right? You might have a top secret clearance and be read into a bunch of compartments. And then 2 weeks later, you were read out. But if we didn't know that and didn't get that data for another 2 months, that was time when you could get access to things that you shouldn't have. Same thing with terminating people. Or right now, this is our favorite time of year in the government space, where contracts are getting extended either through 30-day options, 60-day options through transitions. But there's a clock in the contractor management system that says at the end of September, all these people are off the contract, right? As soon as that contract is extended, we need to know that so we don't automatically shut off those people's accounts. It doesn't help if it tells us 5 days after that completion date in the contractor management system, because they're already turned off and now they're going to spend the next month getting all that access back to do the transition with the team instead of actually being able to do a good transition. The fifth step is duplication or uniqueness, right? Is everybody properly uniquely identified, right? You might have two consultants. One was registered as Tom Adams and one registered as Thomas Adams. But in actuality, they're the exact same person, right? And their unique identifiers might be off and not matched back, so that you've got a risk situation here, right? Where the security officer might look up Tom Adams and Thomas Adams and go, it's the same social security number. I'm just going to pick one. But Thomas actually has lost his security clearance, and that's the right person if the data was properly managed, and then they shouldn't be getting that access, right? So looking at the duplication of the data, making sure unique identifiers are truly unique, making sure other identifiers that join people together, that might not be the unique identifier. A lot of cases it's social security number, right? And yes, there are still certain cases where social security numbers collide, and people have been given duplicate numbers, but that's way less and less today. And the last one is data integrity. And this is very important inside of identity and access management systems. So not only are these other 5 categories right, but is the data correct? Are we pointing to a bunch of contracting officers that are no longer with the organization? At one of the larger government organizations we worked with, when we first went in, 20% of the contracting officers listed as owning their contracts either were no longer in the contracting office and had moved on to other jobs or had left the organization. We also found that some of those contracting officer representatives had left government, become consultants, and still had access to the contract management system and were looking those procurement data up for their new companies and actually looking at how much money the government had. And magically, their organizations were winning some of these contracts, right? So is the data references correct? Is this person really a manager? Are they really a contracting officer representative? Can the person be set as their own manager? That has happened way more than a lot of people would think. So after we start looking at that data quality, we start running down the data dictionary that we talked about in the first session. And these are the exact same 6 I had picked in the first section, but I added a new column here. Is this attribute change relevant, right? If a supervisor changes, what's the process? How do you validate it? If a supervisor leaves the organization, how do you revalidate who the new supervisor is, right? Do you just wait for weeks, maybe months, for a new supervisor to be hired? Or do you automatically make it the supervisor's supervisor? Or do you allow the employee to actually, or contractor, to nominate their own manager in that position and then have the supervisor run through a process that says, yeah, I agree to that? All things that need to be thought about. Is it right? Is it wrong? It depends on your org, but right, as you're working through your attributes, really understanding if this data changes, what systems does it impact? How is it going to slow me down? How is that going to affect people's perception on the quality of data in the system? And how can I continuously make it better? Same things with employee type, right? If you change from employee to contractor, contractor to employee, to non-person, or not non-personality. I can't change from a human to a robot. Though John and I talked about that earlier today with Elon Musk's new chip in your brain. But right, what happens if you get an employee type that isn't in the system normally and magically it shows up as partner one day? Well, we've never seen partners before. If the value doesn't match, do we ignore it? Do we automatically treat everyone as an employee? Do we automatically treat everyone as a contractor? Right? Talk about those things. Duplicate unique identifiers. Unique identifier changes. It happens. It shouldn't happen, but it definitely does in the source systems. Org level changes, department level changes, all of those type of things, looking at as you extend your data dictionary out. So for example, this is something we built for one of our customers, but right, a simple contractor joining the organization. All right, you come in and the first thing you say is, okay, this contractor's joining the organization and who's their manager, right? And normally you just go, oh, the manager is the contracting officer representative. We're going to create a work item for them. We're going to have that contracting officer representative tell us, are they starting? Are they not starting? Right? A lot of times contractors say they're coming on board, but by the time they get onboarded, by the time they go through the process, they might not be available anymore. So the contracting officer goes, nope, they're actually not coming. Tell security personnel to turn off all of their security access, right? Or, yep, they're coming on board and give us a start date. And then on that start date, actually provision and activate. But what happens if you go in and say, hey, that contractor is assigned to this contract, but the contracting officer doesn't work here anymore, or they've moved on to a new position? And right, we might find out from the HR system that the contracting officer representative has moved on, but the contracts office doesn't know that yet. And they might actually be out the door for weeks before the contracting office knows that. right? A lot of times that those reps don't tell their contracting officer that they're leaving until it's after the fact, which is terrible, but it exists. So we built in a process that says, okay, determine manager, right? And this is a process we build for employees, partners, contractors to figure out who is their manager, right? An employee, we look to the HR system. A contractor, we look to what contracts they're assigned to, and then look up the contracting officer representative. So, hey, we have a contractor here. They came into the system to be onboarded, but they're not on a contract, right? So that's the first thing we need to look up is what contracts are they on? Hey, they're not on one. Let's tell the contracts office that, hey, we've got a contractor ready to go here, but they're not assigned anywhere. Can you track it down and figure out where that came from, right? Or, oh, they are on a contract. Let's look up who their primary contracting officer representative is for that contract. Well, that opens up another set of questions, right? Where now we've got a third level that we have to dive into that says, is the contracts core assigned and active, right? Are they still employed here? Are they still working in that position? And right, does the IGA system say they're good to go, right? So that pops in. Yes, we're good to go. Close it out, assign it to them, push the ticket. No, right? Is the contracting officer active, right? And if the contracting officer representative is not, but the contracting officer is, their business rule was to assign that request to the CO. And at the same time, when we did that assignment to the CO, we also reached back into the system, and any in-flight approvals or processes that were assigned to the old contracting officer representative also got reassigned to the CO so that we could also accelerate that access for everyone that was in flight while the core was not to be found because they were no longer with the org. And then we worked through different processes. If the contracting officer representative and the contracting officer both were inactive and still listed on it, right? So these processes, you really have to dig down deep because you want them to be successful, and you don't want these tickets to get stuck in a work queue for 30 days, 60 days, upset end users because they can never get anything approved, or hey, they all come back to your service desk and you have to have a help desk that's calling around to these people, getting them to act on a regular basis. So I'm running a little behind here, but similarly, we have the same process built out for employees going to the manager, right? Are they active and assigned? You can also build in things here that said they wanted, if an employee had a manager who was assigned a manager no longer within the organization, they wanted to prompt that employee to say, tell me who your new manager is. And then we assigned that to the new manager temporarily. And then they had to come in and confirm saying, yes, I'm going to take responsibility for this person temporarily. And then when the updated data came in from the HR system, we applied that new manager from HR to that person and overrode what we call the temporary manager inside of the system. So, right, different way to handle it just for, in this case, was employees. Right, and then what if a manager leaves? How do we reassign their subordinates to new people? If they're a contracting officer, right, they could be a manager and a contracting officer. So what about all the contracts they were core on? Reassignment processes there. And then lastly, and this is one of the biggest things that we have found that make people love your IGA system is as you go through the data dictionary, find out who those data owners are, right? We might be pulling data in from the contracting office that says, here's the people assigned to the contracts, but they don't get good visibility back into the people who are leaving the organization. So if you can run and execute a daily report that says, hey, we've got all of your contracts here, but here's all of the contracts where either the CO or the core no longer work for the organization, and just ship them that report on a daily basis. And then, right, magically, that data starts getting better, right? And you keep doing that for all the different relevant systems that you're pulling in that are authoritative for the different pieces of data, right? We would hope the HR people know when people have left, when they've separated from the organization, and have turned off their accounts in a timely manner. But you'd be amazed how many times people's CAC cards or PIV cards get pulled away and removed and deactivated in those systems, but they're still active in HR. So maybe you do say, hey, all of these people are deactivated inside of the CAC system. We're going to tell HR about that and let them figure out what's going on. And then also use those reports to work on your data quality improvements, report those up to your steering committee month over month, right? Give your data owners kudos that says, hey, we came in here and 20% of the contracting officer representatives that were assigned hadn't worked for the organization in 90 days. Today, 6 months later, we're finding and resolving those data issues within 72 hours, right? That's a huge story. And that also builds a win with the contracting team that you're giving them credit across the organization to very, very high level people that are part of your steering committee, and they look good, right? So everybody wins in that situation. So don't be afraid to get creative. Here's a bunch of different scenarios that we have seen where we've built reports around, right? You'd be amazed how many times there's courses without teachers, right? In the SLED or the education markets, right? If you have service accounts or bots that are assigned to people for their approvals, and those owners of those service accounts and bots go away, what's the process to replace those people and alert that that's happening, right? If you have approval groups for applications and they don't have any members in them anymore, who do you raise those things to? Right? Users without a type code. Are they an employee? Are they a partner? Are they a contractor, right? I don't know. What if there isn't one? How do you handle it? So all kinds of ideas here. And one of my favorite is always, hey, this person's an employee, but they're not actually on the payroll system. And right, sometimes that's okay with a 2-week lag, but hey, this person's an employee and they haven't been on the payroll system for a month. Maybe we should generate a report about that, right? Think about those things, get creative with how you generate those reports, work together with your data owners, your application owners to be more successful together. And then the last step is, and of course you gotta, if I get a chance to put a cute kid in here, I absolutely will, get dirty. My daughter's a goalkeeper, and there's just games where she doesn't want to get down and dirty on the ground to get the balls, and put dirty data into your system. Make that part of your testing process. Every time you have a production problem due to bad data, that needs to immediately become a test case that you're constantly going back and validating release over release over release that makes sure it does not happen again, right? Making the mistake once is okay. Making that mistake the second time, not okay. Making that mistake a third time is when people start getting removed from their positions and people really start losing confidence in your system. I used to joke with some other people in the identity and access management space that you really aren't a member of the community until you've disabled 10,000 accounts in production by accident. But right, that's kind of true. That's how a lot of these systems in the past have worked, is bad data comes in overnight. It had run fine for 20 years, but they did a patch on the HR system which changed the output file format that nobody caught until it was too late and automatically loaded into your system. So execute with bad data, execute with junk data, put in broken pieces that you know should never happen, and see how your systems behave. So key takeaways: know your data, design those fail safes into the system, continuously measure your data quality and your improvements over time, automate as many of those reports as you can to constantly increase your data quality across your organization. Identity governance systems are a spider web. They touch everything across your org. If you've got bad data coming in, you're just going to replicate that bad data all over the place. And we get enough pokes in the eye running identity governance as the problem why people don't get access to things. Let's make sure we can at least do our best to make sure it's not a data problem. And then again, just get dirty, put that bad data into your test systems and see how your systems behave. So with that, we'll open up the floor to questions. I see Darren from DHA just had a hello. So one of the questions that did come in was, if you're changing data across the organization, how do you best manage as it changes from the source systems. And that's one of the things that I like to remind people, right? None of the systems we're consuming or pushing data to are ever static, right? A lot of organizations are moving from their on-premises HR to like a Workday or a new HR system that's cloud hosted. And those identifiers that we had where you were employee 1234 might now be employee 54321, right? So we always say build a unique ID into the identity access management system when a person shows up. And then that unique ID can actually be a parent ID to the persona IDs if you've got things like where someone's an employee and a contractor and or a reservist all at the same time. So, and then also, right, as that data changes, you have to help be more proactive about it and reach out to those data owners, especially from your source authoritative systems. Make sure you've got a good relationship with them because you don't want to hear in 2 weeks we're cutting over to a new system. So, and then another question was, I'm trying to think what else was on here. I saw Darren had another one just come in. No questions really. Yeah, it would be great if everyone had an EDI, PI, or EIP. Make your own. I hate to say it. Generate a UUID when you see an EDIP come in. That is unique to this identity and access management system. It'll just save you a ton of headaches long term. And then another question was, how do you handle multiple sources of identity truth at the same time? And again, right, we might have multiple HR systems within a single organization, or a authoritative source for the employees and a separate one for the contractors. Bring your own unique IDs, and where you can, join the keys that they have. But very much, as I said, build your own. I hate to say it, more data, more to track and manage. But yeah, that has saved me time and time again as those source systems under the covers migrate and change over time. So, alrighty. Well, if there's no other questions today, again, as always, appreciate everybody's time. Our next session will be one of my favorite discussions of governing contractors that I hate to say very few organizations do well even today, and contractors can pose some of our biggest risks. So looking forward to talking to everyone on October 8th. I will turn it back to Katie. Hopefully people got some good info out of today. And feel free to reach out to Maggie and the Carosoft team if you have any questions, if you want copies of the slides. We will be sending out the presentation to everyone to look at in the future. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. Have a great day.